welcome to our program tonight. My name is Grace Hayek. I'm speaking to you from the Glencoe Public Library. Tonight's program on bird identification basics is presented in partnership by the Glencoe Sustainability Task Force, the Friends of the Green Bay Trail, and the Glencoe Community Garden. Special shout out to Mr. Hall Healy, who made this all happen, really. So thank you, Hall. Tonight's program is being recorded, and a copy of it will be on our YouTube channel starting sometime next week. So if you need to leave early, or if you want to watch it all over again, or if you want to share it with somebody, you'll be able to do so. This is a webinar, so you cannot be heard or seen, but you are very, very welcome to put your questions into chat or into Q&A, and I will ask them on your behalf when the presentation is concluded. Now I'm just going to do one little question poll here about how many people are watching. If you could do that for me, I'd appreciate it. Now I would like to introduce tonight's speaker. His name is Refugio Mariscal, and he is the son of Mexican immigrants from the sugarcane and agave fields of the state of Jalisco. He was born and raised in the Chicagoland area and joined Audubon in July 2019 as Wild Indigo Coordinator in Lake County, where he worked to make nature more accessible to communities of color. Currently, he serves as Conservation Data Coordinator, managing the ecological data sets that are crucial to Audubon Great Lakes' wetlands restoration work. He's a board member of the Lake County Audubon Society, a volunteer with the Lake County Forest Preserves, and a former educator. He received his bachelor's degree in geography with a minor in environmental science from DePaul University. Thank you so much for sharing your bird wisdom with us tonight, Mr. Mariscal. And I will let you take it from here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
Just a second, Paul, let's turn off our video and audio now, okay?
Oh, go ahead. I'd just like to say at the beginning that Audubon in French means to good. And you talked about agave fields where Refugio's parents came from. Agave is from a Greek word that means noble and smart. So I would say, by all accounts, we're in for a real treat tonight with Refugio. And please don't leave until we have the grand announcement of Glencoe's official bird, the winner of our bird campaign to create a mascot for Glencoe, just the way the United States has the eagle, Illinois has the cardinal. So stay tuned, and we'll have a lot of fun tonight, and it'll be very informative. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, the contest winner, as Hall said, will be announced after the presentation, but before the questions begin. So thank you very much. All right, it's your show now.
And thanks all I didn't know those two couple things about either agave or Audubon, but that's really interesting. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And thank you, Paul and Grace and the Glencoe Library for having me here, of course. I'm going to share my screen, and I'll start with the presentation here. Everybody can see that okay, right? Okay, so as Grace mentioned, I'm doing a presentation today on bird identification basics. I am not as much of an expert maybe as I said I was, but I working for Audubon, you pick up a few things here and there, of course, right? So like Grace said, my title is Conservation Data Coordinator. I work mostly with our marsh bird monitoring programs throughout the region, the Great Lakes region. We do monitoring mostly in the southern, southeast side of Chicago and northern Indiana. Really to monitor marsh birds and get a good idea of the state of our wetlands. I started with Audubon almost 2 years ago under the engagement program, the engagement team, which is Wild Indigo. That job really is the one that sort of pushed me to learn more about birds and bird identification, because I was leading bird walks. And if it wasn't for that, I don't think I'd be qualified to present here, but I can talk a little bit more about it when I go towards that in the Q&A session. We'll get started now with the presentation. Yeah, thank you all for being here. So just a quick little agenda of what we'll be going over. The very first section, I'll go over some of the common bird sort of groups, families of this region. It's not necessarily grouped scientifically, it's more just like to sort of group them in a way that sort of made sense for our region, which is here in northeastern Illinois. Then we'll go over the basics of bird identification by going over appearance, the calls, time of the year, and the location. These are sort of probably the four different things that I look at most when I'm trying to identify a species of bird. There's a couple other things as well, but these are probably the four biggest ones that for me are the most useful. And then at the end, I'll go over a couple of helpful tools that have helped me really become better at identifying birds and that I still use today. So first, we'll go over some common birds of northeastern Illinois. Here we have probably one of the most common, right? At least for me, is the American robin feeding her chicks here. And again, I'll go over this quickly. If I had, twice the amount, I need about twice the amount of time to go over these bird sort of groupings in much more detail. First up, we have sparrows. They're usually pretty small, usually brown, sometimes like a brown grayish with some white or black on them as well. And they can be found in a whole lot of different habitats. And these can be really difficult to identify. This year's is a song sparrow, but there's a lot more that look very, very similar to it. But that is maybe one of the more common bird families in this region. And next we have some warblers. These ones are usually very small as well. They can be very brightly colored, not always, but especially the males can be very brightly colored, like this black-birding warbler here. They're much more likely to be seen during migration period, which for us is early spring or late spring, early summer, and then again in the early fall, like September, October, mostly October. And again, warblers can be found mostly in woodlands, although a few do like some wetland areas and open fields as well. And then we have waterfowl and herons. Just like the name suggests, right? They can be found mostly in or around near water. They can vary by size. Some can be really small, like a ruddy duck, which is fairly small, or like gray-billed heron, which is one of our larger species, right? But usually on the larger side. Next we have raptors, which include eagles, like you see this bald eagle here, hawks, falcons, owls, and some people will include vultures as well. I will for this case. Most of them are larger in size, fairly big. And usually you can see them sort of soaring through the sky or perched somewhere up high, right, where they can look out for prey down below. Next we have woodpeckers. Woodpeckers vary by size, like this downy woodpecker is their smallest woodpecker, but also our most common woodpecker, or they can be fairly large, like a pileated woodpecker, which is not very common at all, but they're very, very cool to see. Most of them are black and white. They have a sort of similar pattern as you see in this downy woodpecker, with a little bit of red. In this case, the downy woodpecker has a red on the back of its head here that indicates that it is a male. The females do not have that patch of red. I think the only woodpecker that is not the most distinct woodpecker, other than the pileated, I'd say is the northern flicker, which is mostly actually brown, with some black on it as well. That's why I said mostly black and white, but not always the case. And the woodpeckers, of course, as the name suggests, are mostly seen in woodlands. Next we have blackbirds, mostly medium sized, like about the size of a robin, maybe around there.
They can be found in various different habitats. You can find like this red-winged blackbird, you can find them in sort of marshes and wetlands, or open fields, your backyards. And they're not always necessarily just mostly black, like the orioles, right? Orioles have if you've seen an oriole, they have a nice bright orange with some black as well. But in this group, I'm including the red-winged blackbird that you see here, orioles, grackles, starlings, and those types, and also the brown-headed cowbirds. And then the last grouping that I have here are sort of common yard birds, at least common in this area, which include American robin, blue jays, northern cardinals, chickadees, and nuthatches. And obviously, these lists and these groupings aren't exhaustive, right? They're not, like I said before, scientifically arranged. I sort of just arranged them in ways that sort of made sense to me based on what I've seen here in our region. So we'll go now to sort of what I use to identify birds, right? The first one that I think for me and for most people is probably the most apparent one is appearance, right? What does a bird look like? What's the size, the shape, the color, the pattern? For most people, I think that was usually the go-to when we're looking to identify a species. So first we'll go by size. For example, like how big, when I see a bird, either flying or in a bush and a tree, I like to compare it to the size of other birds. Like how big is the bird compared to, say, a robin that you see here, is robin silhouette here in the middle. Is it bigger than robin, but not as big as a Canada goose here on the right, or is it smaller like this house sparrow on the left? That usually is one of the bigger indicators of what this group of birds or family of birds you're looking at. Then it's the shape, right? Especially this comes in really handy when you can only really see them from a distance when they're flying in the sky. So how would you describe this bird, this silhouette? And you can type in the chat. What do you see here that is sort of distinctive about this bird, or how would you go about identifying this bird just from the silhouette itself? What do you know about this bird, or what do you think about this bird might be? And you can take some guesses as well. What do you think this bird is? Yeah, it kind of looks like a raptor, right? With some broad wings. The wingspan looks pretty big, so it's a larger bird. Fringed wingtips, right? I like to think of those fringes sort of as like they almost remind you like fingers. Yeah, so I think we also notice that the wings are pretty big. It's got a rather large wingspan, so it's probably not something like a sparrow or something, right? And it's something larger. Some people call it maybe a raptor. Down here is thinking a crow, and that's right, it's a crow. It's not. It's hard to tell now here because it's just a picture, right? And we're not out, and we can't really compare it to other objects around here. So it does look a little bit like a raptor, but this is a crow. Crows have, but they have wide wings and not usually as their wingspan is not as large as a lot of other raptors or a lot of raptors, but their wings are still pretty hefty looking, right? So this is a crow. Nice, good. Those some good guesses there, and good observations. And so the size and the shape of a bird can be really important when we can't see the details, right? When it's dark outside, where the bird is sort of in the shade, is sort of washed out by the background. And so again, for those of you that would like to type in the chat, what is something that you can see about the size and shape of this bird here that might help you identify its species? All right, so we got long neck. Yeah, it's got a very long, slender neck.
It looks like a heron, right? Yeah, and it looks like I'd say it looks like a heron because it's a little tall and slender. The long beak, long pointy beak. It looks like this one might have something in its beak right now. And obviously this picture is not from here, right? Because looks like there's some mountains in the back. But this is a bird that's very common, or generally common to this area. And somebody already guessed it here. It is an egret. I think egret and heron's silhouette at least look very similar, right? So that was a really good guess. This is a great egret. We know it's a great egret and not a different kind of egret because the other egrets are not very common, like snowy egret are not as common in this area here as well. But this is a great egret sort of wading through the water. And this is a picture, that's the same picture, not the same egret, but a very similar picture of the bird now in the daylight, right? So the color. The color can really help us narrow down the groups or families, right? Like the sparrow here is very brown, and it's pretty typical of other sparrows. If you see a really small sort of brownish, maybe grayish bird, really no matter where you are, it's very likely that it could be a sparrow. If it's small and really brightly colored, then for our area here, it could very well be a warbler, right? So the color is definitely a really important thing, a really important aspect for us to consider. And I was just making this section rather short because I think if I really get into the colors, different colors of the different species, I think you could be here probably all night. But one more thing we really want to consider for tonight in terms of the color is male versus female. This cardinal here, I think mostly we think of cardinals as the red. You can see this male here, very brightly colored red with a little black on his face. Usually when I think of cardinal, I think of the red, right? But the female is here as well. It's got a little bit of red, but it's mostly brown. Right? And that is the case for not all, but a lot of bird species, is that the males are usually a lot more brightly colored than the females. Can anybody take a guess as to why that might be? So why the male birds, not always, but in a lot of cases, are more brightly colored than females. Yeah, attract the mate to attract the female. Oh, yeah, that's a really good answer. And I think that for the most part, yeah, that's right. So males are a lot more bright colored because they want to sort of take that risk, right, to attract a mate to be able to pass on their genes. It wouldn't really do much good for the female to be brightly colored, especially when you consider that a lot of the females are the ones that incubate the eggs, right? So if this female was as bright red as the male, and she were sitting on her nest with eggs, she would be a lot more easy for predators or something that could eat the eggs, right, to see her and see the nest. And so she doesn't necessarily need to be the bright red in it. I think it'd be wouldn't really work out as well for her if she was that same bright red as the male. And one more thing as well that to think about when we talk about color is the time of the year. Some birds are very bright colored right now in the summer or in the spring, but then when it comes to the winter, their colors can dull out a little bit. One good example that we see here in this area that's fairly common is a goldfinch, the male goldfinch at least. Male goldfinch is right now, the mature ones at least, mature male goldfinches will be a very bright yellow with some black, but the yellow stands out quite a bit. And then once winter hits, the color will be a lot more dull, and then it's difficult to distinguish between the males and the females. It'll be a lot more brown, like this cardinal here.
And I think that has to do probably with what we mentioned already, right? They don't need to attract a mate anymore. It's not breeding season, and also, you know, against the white the white snow in the winter, I think they'd stand a lot more and not be able to hide as well. So their feathers turn into a more brownish as opposed to the yellow in the summer. And then next we have pattern. There's some birds have a really distinctive color patterns here, like this bobolink. This bobolink are known for wearing sort of their backwards tuxedo, people call it. Some people say that their back pattern looks like a tuxedo. It's a really interesting bird. You know, it's got the little sort of afro, yellow little afro in the back, and then the tuxedo in the back. And especially when we look at the other pictures that we had here of the woodpeckers, and let's try to scroll back up to the woodpecker. For the patterns, there we are. You notice that a lot of woodpeckers have this sort of really similar pattern here. So if you see something flying around that looks like it's got a lot of stripes or sort of dots, it's mostly black and white, it could be a woodpecker. I'm trying to find a spot. Okay. Now the calls. I'm not sure if you'll be able to hear this, but I had a call here for Northern Cardinal because this one is probably one of the most distinctive calls, at least for me in this area, and one more common, right? It sounds sort of like a laser beam shooting out. I'm not sure if you'll be able to hear it. Can you hear that? Okay, good. Yeah, so I don't know if you hear that sort of laser beam sound, sort of steady laser beam sound. If you hear that in your backyard, then that is very likely a cardinal. And it's pretty common for a lot of birds to have sort of really distinct calls. And this one for me, at least I learned to identify birds by their calls. It's probably like the most difficult for me. Like I said, some birds have really distinct calls, but others have calls that are very similar to one another. And then there's even other birds like the mockingbird or red-winged blackbird that make the sounds that sound a lot like other birds as well. So it's a really difficult thing to learn, but it can make being able to identify a bird much easier. And then next we have sort of the time of the year, right? So this loon, this common loon that we see here in this lake, and other waterfowl are more likely to be seen in the winter, right? Not all birds can tolerate the cold, some prefer the warmth. So some birds that we might see plenty of here in the summer will not be here at all in the winter. You won't see any of those in the winter because they like to keep, they like the warmth. They rely, their food source might be mostly insects, and there's not that many insects in the winter, right? So they'll fly down south and they'll migrate south to much warmer areas. So, like I said, warblers are one of those. That's why it's much more common to see them during migration time, which starts something like late April, early May. May is really the peak for migration, and it's when people get really excited. It's a lot of people's favorite time of the year because that is when we see most of the warblers, right? A lot of the warblers don't necessarily stay here, So we really would only have like maybe that month and a half long window to see most of these warblers. Just a couple of species that really stay here and breed throughout the summer at least. And then we'll see them back again in early fall. But in this case, most of them will be, or the males at least, will be a different color because the breeding season has ended, right? And so going back to sort of the color, their color won't be maybe as bright as it was during spring migration. And as I mentioned earlier, winter is a really good time to see waterfowl. They seem to like the cold, and as long as the lakes aren't frozen over, and we have plenty of them, right? You should be able to see some ducks or mergansers or this common loon swimming around. Now, the last category that I wanted to go over, and so one of the things that really helped me to identify the birds is the habitat. Whenever usually I go and plan an outing, right? I think of sort of what birds can I see there? What is that habitat like? Is there a lot of grass? Is there a lot of grassland? Is there a lot of woods? Or even this plays into effect as well when I'm trying to find a specific bird, or if you want to see a specific species. Like I wanted to see, a couple weeks ago, I really wanted to see a bobolink. Bobolinks stay here throughout most of the summer, but those birds are not as common like in the woods, like you see in this picture. They're very much more common in the grasslands. So I went to Rollins Savannah, which is in Grays Lake, in Lake County, and it's not bobolink, right? If I had gone to somewhere with a lot of woods, I don't think I would have been able to see one. They wouldn't really be there. So in this sort of forest, what birds might be able to see here, like in this setting, like in this picture here? I already mentioned not bobolinks, right? Not a marsh wren. But what are some birds that we think we might be able to see in that area that has a lot of woods? Woodpecker, yeah, of course, good one. So I think we use just about every type of woodpecker that we have here in most of the woods here. They're fairly common, except for the affiliated woodpecker, but the rest are fairly common. Owl, warbler, goldfinch, yeah. The only place I've seen an owl so far here has been in the woods. And the warblers, like I mentioned earlier, right, are much more common in the woods. The one thing about them, though, is that they like to be really high up in those woods, really high up in those trees, and so it makes it really difficult to be able to identify sometimes. But during migration time, if you want to see some warblers, go somewhere where there's some more woodlands and forests. Yeah, scarlet tanager. It's another good one as well. Cardinal, robin, junco, chickadee. I think all those are fairly common in the woodland areas. Or at least this is what we're going to see them the most, probably. The woodland. So now for so the last section that I had here was on sort of the tools that have helped me being able to identify birds, right? Being able to get sort of this level where I can sort of think through these different things like the habitat, the colors, the shape and the pattern, maybe the behavior, and what I've used to tell me, right? Because it's just something that I'm still definitely learning on. I am by no means know every single species. There's something over 300 something bird species in Illinois alone, right? So there's no way at this point, I've been only sort of birding for a couple of years. Am I going to learn all that? So I definitely rely on a lot of guides, like physical guides. There's plenty of books out there, bird guides that are super helpful, and there's different ones. Everybody sort of has their favorite, and there's even guides that'll be very, very specific to groups. Like so, there's some guides I've seen the guides there that are out there for identifying just waterfowl or just identifying warblers, right?
because again, warblers are really difficult to identify. So if you're interested in learning more and be able to sort of pick up this hobby, I would definitely suggest buying a bird guide. And another thing that's really helped me a lot are apps, mobile apps. And I'm gonna show a video really quick here that I recorded about a year ago for our YouTube channel, showing how to go through these apps. The first one will be the Audubon app, and then the second will be the Merlin Bird ID app. The video is in Spanish, but I'm gonna mute the sound and I'll just sort of narrate the part from here. So here I'm just showing, open the Audubon app, and as you can see here, that it's fairly complex. There's a lot of things going on in the app. A lot of the but when you open it, it'll show you some little sort of mini bird guide. And both of these apps are free. Both the Audubon app and Merlin Bird ID app are free. And this one, I think, is the first one that I actually downloaded first. So when you're trying to figure out what species is, you can click on search for bird ID, and then you'll see right there at the bottom, as long as you have a location already set. In this case, I had Illinois in July. They already sort of provide you with a list of possible species down at the bottom there. You'll see in the middle, there's 2 different categories where we can choose to begin with. And here I started with size. So you want to see what size was the bird. Is it closest to a heron, a mallard, a crow, robin, or sparrow? In this case, this bird is closer to a sparrow. You can see already at the bottom that list has already narrowed down. Next is the color. So I picked tan. So it's a light brown, black, and with every color choice that I do, you can see that the list narrows down even further. And then add some yellow as well. You'll see up top that there's a few different categories we can choose from. Next, I chose habitat. So where did we see this bird? Forest, shrubland, desert, high mountains. In this case, it was a shrubland / savanna. And again, that list narrowed down. And once you finish, it'll give you all the possible birds that you might have seen, given the choices that you put in, right? So was it a common yellowthroat? So the bird had a little bit of brown with some black and yellow. It looked a little bit like common yellowthroat, but it was actually the cedar waxwing. And the nice thing about this app is that you can click on each bird, and it'll give you a little bit more information, so you can maybe narrow it down a little bit more. So here I click on cedar waxwing. I'll show you some more pictures, and then there's a description, and then you can hear the songs and the range, and a lot more information for this bird, just in case you still aren't sure, or if you just want to learn more, right? There's the sightings, which will pop up the sightings that species, and then another similar bird species. So it's a really cool app. I personally use it quite a bit, especially with the calls and the descriptions. The next one is a Merlin Bird ID app. Not to be confused with the eBird, which is by the same organization. This one's a lot more simple. It's more just to identify the birds there, and not so much to read through the descriptions. So you start the bird ID, get the current location. In this case, it was July 27th. So then I click on next. And again, similar to the other one, what was the size of the bird, right? What was it between the crow and the goose? I think before I said between the sparrow and the robin. The colors is brown, black, and yellow. And then again, the behavior, what was the bird doing? Was it eating in the feeder, swimming? Was it on the ground, in a tree or a bush, on a fence or a wire, or was it flying high up in the air? I think the other one had the habitat. In this case, it was in a sort of forest, savanna, in the bush. And so the bird here that again that we see, this one identified right at the very top, right, is the cedar waxwing, which in this case in this app here I had it in Spanish, so it's Apellis americana. And so those are they're really the two apps that I probably use the most when I'm out in the field, when I'm out birding, to help identify what it is that I'm seeing when I'm having trouble trying to figure out what it is that I'm seeing, which happens quite often. It happens to all of us, right? But obviously, this is there's a couple other apps as well, but I think these two are the ones that, for me, are the most useful. And one thing that I wanted to mention as well before I finish is sort of the importance of understanding sort of that while we're seeing these birds now, we might not be seeing them in the future if sort of climate change takes the same trajectory as we're seeing now. And then Audubon did come out with a different tool to sort of be able to communicate that. And that's a survival by degrees. If you go on the website or just Google survival by degrees, you'll see sort of a link to a page that has different tools that will help you identify birds that in your area might be in trouble because of climate change, right? Might have to expand their range further north because of climate change, depending on the scenarios that we put in there. So if anyone's a little bit more interested in learning about that, sort of just Google survival by degrees, and then you can type in your zip code, and it'll show a lot of bird species in your region, and it'll tell you sort of what level they are and how threatened they might be. And that was the end of my presentation. There's a lot of details that I didn't go over because obviously we could be here all night. We can go delve into these a lot further. We only really had a few minutes, right? And so thank you so much for having me here. I think we're going to do announce it next, and after that, I'm going to stick around for any sort of questions. I know there's a couple questions that were asked already in the chat, but if there's any more questions as well, I'll stick around.
Great, thank you so much, Mr. Marsgall. You make me want to get out there and start looking up. I think Mr. Healy is going to make the announcement about Glencoe's most impeccable bird contest winner right now. So Hall, you want to talk about that?
Sure, I'd like to share my screen. May I do that?
You should be able to do that, yeah.
Okay. We've had a campaign over the last several months, and many of you may have seen this ballot, as we call it, on the village website at impeccableBird, villageofglencoe.org/impeccableBird. And these 10 were chosen because they can be seen in Glencoe reasonably commonly. The only one you would not see in Glencoe proper on your property, unless you have a pond, would be the great blue heron. But you can see that on the golf courses where there are ponds, and certainly in the Skokie lagoons. So all of these are pretty common. I won't tell you which one I voted for, but the first graders voted, and so did many residents. I think it was over 400, voted. And we had 2 sessions at the farmers market last week and the week before to explain the program. And many people came by and saw our stuffed or taxidermied great horned owl, which is number 1 on this ballot here. So with the drum roll and the trumpet blowing, we will we will announce the grand winner, which is the ruby-throated hummingbird. And it is a favorite, obviously. If I bet everybody on this call has seen them. We've seen them a number of times already in our backyard. They come through, they can fly, but Refugio, 50, 80 miles an hour. No, they flap their wings 50 to 80 times a second, is it?
Yeah,
And they
yeah, something
weigh,
like that.
is that about right? And they weigh just a little more than a dime. And I think it takes over 100 of them to make a pound, to weigh a pound. So they can fly across the 500 miles of the Gulf of Mexico without stopping. Of course, there's no place to stop, but they can do that nonstop. It's really a feat to be able to fly that far without any sustenance beforehand. They love to go out after the flowers, where they get their food out of the flowers, and I think this is a wonderful choice. So you're liable to see the ruby-throated hummingbird around the village in one form or another, in the form of a mascot or signage explaining who the bird is, why it's important to protect it, and many other things about this bird as well as other birds, their habitats, and what makes them so special. And they're eating insects. The owl, he loves chipmunks, squirrels, rabbits. We woke up one morning with a rabbit on our roof, and we know that the owl must have deposited it there the night before. So this is the grand winner of Glencoe's Impeccable Bird Campaign. And thank you all for participating. Now, Refugio, we'd like to go back to questions for you. Grace, you're going to do that, right?
Yes. We have one person, Maggie, wants to know a little bit more about bobolinks. If you can tell us what's their habitat, and can you say anything more about bobolinks?
Yeah. Bobolinks, so I think the name it sounds really interesting. It's all live mostly in grasslands. So you'll see them. You'll see them very rarely near woodlands, but they're big grassland birds, so like open prairies and savannas. Up here by me, I live in Lake County. So by me, the one place that I usually go to see bobolinks are around Savannah in Grays Lake. So that's really the habitat they like. They are a bird that is not very common, and they are very threatened by climate change and all and so their range might be going a little bit further north. Things sort of continue the way they are, which is unfortunate because they're a very cool bird to see.
Right, thank you. Question from Paul. How long do Baltimore Orioles stay here? This year I only had them in my yard for about 2 weeks early in the spring. Is that about right for a migrating bird?
They're breeding birds here. I'm sure some of them go even further north as well. But I think they usually stay here most of the summer. I have some in my neighbor's yard, not so much in mine, but there's a nest in my neighbor's yard. And almost every time I go out there, they're still, I can hear them singing or see them. But it seems like this year a lot of people have sort of not seen as many Orioles in their yards as they had the past year. So I wonder if anything, maybe the drought or something has anything to do with that.
Okay. Relatedly, Maggie asks, why don't I see more Orioles and tanagers despite having oranges out for them to eat?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't really answer that question, right? I think something that I've seen as well, that it seems like a lot of people are sort of are having the same sort of issues, experiences as well. I only have, I moved to a different house this past year, so I can't compare it to before to my own house before, but I do have a couple Orioles living near my backyard. No tanagers though. I haven't seen any tanagers this year.
Joni asks, what biologically causes their colors to change? Is it diet or genetics?
So for some birds, it is diet. Flamingos are pink. They're not naturally pink, or they're not really pink. I think they're more a grayish color, but they're pink because of what they eat, which is like some sort of shrimp or something. They're not native to here, right? We're not going to see flamingos here, but flamingos are really probably like the best example that I can think of why birds change color because of their diet. I don't think it's super common, but I know flamingos do it. And then sort of it's just something that that's sort of been that they've evolved to do, to change colors in the winter. Birds aren't the only species only animals that do that. I think some rabbits and hares might change color as well. Foxes, right, change color. Arctic foxes change color in the winter or in the summer. A lot of it's for camouflage or attracting a mate or something like that. Yeah.
Thank you. Eileen says we have Orioles daily. They love grape jelly. Thank you for that tip.
Yeah, people put out jelly for the Orioles.
Hall wants to know, wasn't spring migration earlier this year, and if so, why?
I don't know if it was earlier, but I know it does sometimes when for years where it might be warmer. We have a warmer spring. We might start seeing maybe birds a little earlier if it was warmer, further south as well. I know that if the weather the climate does change from year to year, that can affect the migrating birds, because like I said, if it's warmer, if we're having like a warmer winter, a warmer spring, like an early spring, that can cause the flowers to come up a little sooner, and a lot of the birds rely on those flowers. So it can change, but I don't know for sure if spring migration was earlier this year. I wasn't as in tune with that this year. I have a 9-month-old daughter, so I've been very busy. Haven't been able to go out birding as often as I'd like.
Understandable. Don says, excellent presentation. Do you have any suggestions for getting started at recognizing bird calls?
I just go out there. There's whatever you hear in your backyard. It's a lot of times it's hard to figure out what kind of bird is making that noise, right? But it really just takes practice. There are like in the bird guides that I show, the Audubon bird guide and the Merlin bird ID guides, there are calls that you can play. So if you see a bird and you're wondering what sound it makes, which species it is, you can look it up, and then there has a function there to play some of the bird calls. Audubon does have as well an online guide that can play calls and just start sort of recognizing them, but it really takes practice.
Thank you. Jim would like to know, besides putting up a bird feeder, what else can we do in our landscape to attract birds?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and really important one too. So the biggest thing you can do is to plant native plants, right? Take out, get rid of your lawn if you can, and put in native plants, like milkweeds and bergamot and cup plants and things like that. Depending on your site, depends a little bit on what plants you can put in. But really, the biggest thing you can do is, like I said, put native plants in, and then also, especially right now when it gets really hot. Maybe like a bird bath or something like that. That'll help out the birds when it's really hot, or in the winter when everything's frozen over. But yeah, native plants are the way to go.
Thank you. And I wanted to ask you, if you're just getting started bird watching, what's a good strength of binoculars to get? You can there's, the ultra cheap ones, which probably aren't really worth it. And then you can go as high as you want. But what's a good starter
Yeah.
power for beginners?
I think that the magnification that people mostly use is 8x42, if I'm not mistaken. There's a lot of, some people use the 10 by 42, but the 10 does allow you to see further, but it also, you have to have a steadier hand. If your hand is a little shaky, you're not gonna be able to see it as well. So I think most people go with a magnification level of 8 by 32. And like you said, you can get them in total range of prices. You can get some see for like $20 up to a couple $1,000, right? So whatever you can get with, if it's in your budget, should be good.
Okay, thank you. BC asks, they saw a bittern in their garden this year, and she's wondering if you have anything to say about that, because it seemed unusual to her.
Yeah, that is very unusual. Bitterns are not very common birds as is. I'm thinking about the American bittern or least bittern, which is one of the birds that we actually, both of those birds we monitor for at different marshland sites throughout the area. And I personally have never seen one. Most people never see them. They usually just hear them because they're secretive marsh birds, so mostly in wetlands, but they like to hide between the reeds and then the cattails and all that. So seeing one in your backyard, yeah, is definitely rare, and a nice treat.
Well done, BC. And Eileen says, we've noticed that birds seem larger this year, the woodpeckers and blue jays especially.
Well, I don't know, maybe your birds are the birds that are in your backyard or something that are getting a lot of food. You're doing a good job feeding them, I think. Haven't noticed that.
Paul asks, how do you tell the difference between a male and female blue jay?
As far as I know, I think blue jays, there's no difference really, any big distinctive difference between male and female blue jays. Yeah, not all birds, the male or female are different. Some like I said, the male is more brightly colored than the female, and in some cases, like raptors, the female is actually bigger than the male. Not all raptors, but a lot of raptors, like hawks and falcons, and all that. The female can be quite bigger than the male.
All right, here's another question. Do you recommend putting up bird feeders? Is there a risk that the birds will become too dependent on them?
I don't know a definitive answer for that one, but I know that there has been concerns of people putting up bird feeders while a lot of the birds have just hatched, right? So people think that, especially like Orioles or something, they won't be fed as nutritious meals because they usually like worms, or worms might be more nutritious. And if there's no worms, right, they'll go for the bird feeders, whatever's in the bird feeders. I think a lot of times when people take down their bird feeders or suggest that they take down their bird feeders are if in the case of disease or something that's going to spread amongst birds. I think that's something that's happening. I think somewhere in the East Coast now, where people are concerned that they're seeing a lot of birds that are blind. They're not sure why, but they think it might be something that they're passing on to each other from being at the bird feeders. So there is some risk. There can be some risk involved, right? But
all right. Wow, thank you. I'd never heard of that. Here's another question on this year on the 13 and 17-year cicadas. They've heard that there's an increase in bird populations afterward that lasts for several years because of the extra cicada feast. Have you heard about that?
Yeah, that can happen. There are some population booms when there's more food.
Yeah.
for birds, and not all species, right? The different species. Unfortunately, sometimes that also means that there'll be a population drawdown a couple of years later, because then there's not as much food. When there's no more cicadas, right, there won't be as much food to feed the rest. But I think our turn for cicadas here is in like 2 years, 3 years or so. So I guess we'll see that here in about 3 or 4 years.
And finally, what can people do to see more of our newest Glencoe official mascot bird, the ruby-throated hummingbird? How can you bring those to your own backyard?
There are hummingbird feeders. I have one in my backyard. Usually it's like a little piece of glass or plastic that has like some little fake flowers on them. And you can put your own, you can buy nectar at a store, or you can make your own. It's just sugar, and it's just sugar water. But putting out a hummingbird feeder will help. And also, as well, like I mentioned, for native plants that have nectar in them are definitely something that will attract ruby-throated hummingbirds.
All right. Well, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun, and I think we all learned something. Thank you so much, Hall, for organizing this and for being the driving force behind the very exciting mascot contest. I know I voted several times.
Good Chicago style voting. I just want to recommend some guides, the old fashioned kind. Sibley Birds is probably, would you say, Refugio, the premier guide in printed form.
That's one of the most popular ones, yeah. For sure.
It's a little hard to put in your back pocket. So I like my old fashioned Roger Tory Peterson guide, which almost fits in my pocket. And there are also lots of books around to help you entice kids to be interested in birds, like this bird brain teaser book. So there are ways to draw kids in. The first graders that voted on the bird for Glencoe really got enthralled with this whole program. So when you start them young, that helps.
Yeah. My own daughter, she's 4 and she has her own bird guide and binoculars and all that. So I made sure to start her young as well.
I wish we had time to ask some of the participants what some of their favorite bird experiences or encounters have been, because they often are what really draw us into bird watching. I understand that bird watching is the most numerous sport, if you want to call it that, in America. There are more bird watchers than there are football game watchers. And it numbers in the many, many, many millions. So it is a popular sport.
Well, thank you for that and for sharing the books. If you are ever looking for books on birds, your local library can help you out. So please come in. Thank you, Mr. Mariscal. Thank you, Hall. And
Thank you all.
good night, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Good night, Grace. Thank you. Thank you, Refugio.